The timeless controversy surrounding the illusion of a separate self and the ego's function in spirituality has gained renewed interest in recent years as the world becomes increasingly narcissistic and self-absorbed. This phenomenon has led many to re-evaluate their understanding of the self and the role of ego in the spiritual journey. For millennia, thinkers and spiritual leaders have wrestled with the question of how to reconcile the ego's inherent selfishness with the pursuit of spiritual growth and enlightenment. In today's world, where narcissism and self-obsession are seemingly at an all-time high, this debate has taken on new urgency. As we grapple with the challenges of modern life, it is more important than ever to understand the true nature of the self and the ego's place within it. But right off the bat, I can tell you that this is not one more kill your ego video. In many spiritual circles, the ego is often regarded as a formidable obstacle to spiritual growth and enlightenment. However, is the pursuit of ego dissolution truly humanly possible and desirable? For centuries, philosophers, spiritual leaders, and seekers of truth have pondered this question with great interest. While it is undeniable that many spiritual traditions advocate for the transcendence or dissolution of the ego, it's crucially important to recognize that this entity cannot be readily abolished from the human experience. Essentially, the ego serves various purposes, including protecting the self from harm and providing a sense of identity and purpose. The notion that the ego must be utterly eradicated is oversimplifying the complex nature of the human psyche. It's essential to grasp that the ego is not merely an evil entity that has to be banished, but rather a multifaceted construct with various functions and roles. The ego can also be the source of immense suffering, leading individuals down a path of self-importance, self-centeredness, and pride. By acknowledging the complexity of the ego and its both positive and negative aspects, we can gain a deeper understanding of the human condition and the path to spiritual growth. The key to resolving this conundrum doesn't lie in abolishing the ego entirely, but rather in comprehending its role and value. Just as emotions and feelings are inherent to the human experience and serve essential purposes, the ego too has a purpose beyond mere self-importance. By acknowledging and regulating the ego, we can harness its potential without being controlled by it, much like learning to manage our emotions and desires. In this manner, the ego becomes a helpful ally on our path towards self-discovery and enlightenment, rather than an insurmountable obstacle. The ego is like a shadow that always follows us, or a machine component that's deeply ingrained in our being. Attempting to eradicate it is futile, for it's an integral part of our human experience. Just like chasing your shadow or trying to remove a well-crafted machine component, it's impossible to eradicate the ego completely. Instead, we must learn to navigate and manage it wisely, understanding its role and function in our lives. Imagine this. You're on a quest to find the key to inner peace and freedom from ego. You try meditation, yoga, maybe even a retreat or two, but these methods are like band-aids on a wound that runs deeper than we realize. The ego, in its cleverness, uses these very methods to keep us in its grasp, perpetuating the cycle of seeking and striving. It's like trying to break a persistent echo by shouting louder. It won't work. It's self-aware and it won't self-destroy. In simple terms, we must work with the ego instead of working against it. What we chase we become, what we fight we become. It's the very distortion about ego where most people are trapped into, the supremacy principle. What if the self we perceive is merely a construct, woven from the fabric of our experiences, memories, and societal influences? What if our sense of identity is not as concrete as we believe? But how does this consciousness manifest in the world? The answer lies in the ego. The ego is the mechanism through which manifestation takes place. It's the personification of consciousness, the vehicle through which our thoughts, emotions, and experiences arise. Without the ego, there would be no experience of separation, no distinction between subject and object. Despite their differences, consciousness and ego are closely related. In fact, the ego is often seen as a manifestation of consciousness, as it is the aspect of the self that is most closely tied to our conscious experience. The ego emerges as a result of the development of the brain's cognitive functions, which are themselves a manifestation of consciousness. The ego is often seen as a filter or a screen that mediates our experience of the world. There's a problem with the ego though. It's not that the ego is inherently bad, but rather that it forgets its true nature. It believes in its own separate existence, creating a sense of duality and separation between the self and the world. This belief in separation leads to feelings of isolation, disconnection, and suffering. As a psychological construct, the ego refers to a person's sense of self or identity. It is a complex and multifaceted construct that can have both positive and negative effects on our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. On the one hand, the ego can provide motivation and self-confidence, helping us to achieve our goals and pursue our desires. It can also serve as a protective shield, defending us from emotional pain and vulnerability. On the other hand, the ego can be a source of suffering, leading to self-centeredness, egotism, and narcissism. It can also limit our creativity, innovation, and ability to adapt to changing situations, making us stuck in our ways and rigid in our beliefs. The ego can be inflated or deflated depending on external circumstances and internal experiences, leading to feelings of insecurity, low self-esteem, or grandiosity. It can also hinder spiritual growth and personal development, preventing us from realizing our true potential and connect with a higher power or universal consciousness. So, how do we overcome this problem? The key is to remove the belief in a separate self, not to get rid of the ego itself. See, the ego continues to act and relate, but without the belief in a separate self, its activities and relationships are transformed. It's like the difference between looking at the world through a mirror and looking at it directly. The belief in a separate self is a fundamental aspect of the human experience. We identify ourselves as individuals, distinct from others and the world around us. This fact is so ingrained that it can't and shouldn't be challenged. It doesn't matter how spiritually evolved we are, as long as we are humans on this earth, we are still individuals being part of a greater whole, like a community group or society. It's the belief in a separate self, the root cause of much of our suffering in today's hyper-egoistic world. This separation leads to feelings of isolation, disconnection, and fear. We believe that the world is a separate entity from us, and that we are separate from the world. This belief creates a sense of competition and struggle for survival, as we believe that the world has limited resources and that we must compete with others for those resources. But the truth is that the self is not a separate entity from the world. The self is an illusionary construct, created by the mind to help us make sense of our experiences. The self is not a fixed entity, but rather a fluid and ever-changing construct that is shaped by our experiences and perceptions. You might be wondering, if the ego isn't the problem, then what is? This final section is paramount for complete comprehension. The ego's role in manifestation isn't limited to creating our experiences, but also shaping our perceptions of reality through which we interpret experiences and restart the eternal cycle of creating and interpreting. Our ego filters the information we receive, creating a reality that confirms its beliefs and expectations. In essence, the ego is the mechanism by which our desires and beliefs become individual manifestations in the physical world. The individual manifestations co-create reality with other individual manifestations, much like different parts of a community come together to form a whole. The ego is necessary for the individual to exist, just as all parts of a community are necessary for the whole to function. The next time you're lost in thought, remember that the ego isn't your enemy, it's merely a tool that helps you navigate this reality. Embracing a positive ego can unlock a profound understanding of yourself and the universe around you. We are all part of the grand plan, but our roles are distinct. Bless be.